Welcome to J48 Ministries with Jonathan Pike, Wil Bailey, Terry Chambers, and special guest Tracey Hathaway, where we'll be discussing Do Not Grow Weary.
Thank you, Will. Tracey, what an honor to have you today. So glad to have you here.
Good to be here.
Tara, always good to have you too. All right, Tracey, we've got a very special topic. Do not grow weary. Mm-hmm. But what we're really focusing on is don't lose the hope that your spouse or family member would come to church.
Yes.
You and Tara both have had personal experiences with this. Unfortunately, in this case, both with your husbands. Mm-hmm. And I want to touch on that today because I know as a pastor there's a lot. The church is usually primarily filled with the ladies, with the mothers. And, there's a statistic on that tells us, it says if a mother comes to Christ, her family will join a church at only 17% of the time. But when a father comes to Christ, his family joins him at 93% of the time. Them are unbelievable statistics. So I want you to touch on, and Tara also, both of y'all touch on what you did to get your husbands in church.
Okay.
But I want to start out first with telling us about your husband. When y'all got married, did y'all go to church?
No, I did, but he did not.
So when you first get married, were you a lifelong church member at this time? You'd went your whole life?
Oh, yes. I was born and raised in church. My great-grandparents started the church that I went to, so we were there every time the doors opened.
What about you, Tara?
I've been in church all my life.
All right, so you both come from God-fearing homes,
yes,
God-fearing families. All right, but then you get married. So did Joe go to church?
No.
Never?
Never.
What about...
I think Scott may have went some whenever he was younger in high school,
Just off and on here and there?
Youth. I think he went some, but not a lot.
Okay, so maybe a little bit with Scott, none with Joe. Mm-hmm. Now, when y'all first started dating, was this something y'all kind of pushed?
No, not really.
Not really? What about you, Tara?
No.
No. Okay, so you get married. Are you still going to church at this point?
For a while, no.
For a while, no. What about you, Tara?
For a while, no.
Okay. So you get married. Now, all of a sudden, you're out of church. What made you go back to church?
For me, it's when I had Gracie, our first child. I knew how important it was to raise my children in the eyes of the Lord and in the church. And so that's really what got me back going.
What about you, Tracey?
Really, it was after my children had gotten to elementary school and I realized that I had gotten away from church and gotten away from God, and he was working on me hard to get back into church.
When y'all were both out, just be honest right here and think about it for a little bit. Were you maybe spiritually miserable there?
Yes, I believe so.
Probably so. I mean, looking back, yes, but at the time, this goes back to some of my testimony and before I really surrendered to Christ. At that time in my life, I was doing my own thing.
Right.
I'm going to be honest with you. I was not praying for a godly husband. I mean, Scott, let's just face it, he was a hard-working man.
Right.
I was very attracted to him. We had good times together, and life at that very moment was good for me.
Would you both say you was about your mid to early 20s?
I was.
Yes, I
Okay.
Mid-20s.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so here's the scenario. We're getting back into church some now, though, but only you are with your children. No husbands, right?
Right.
What did your husband say when you first started coming back to church?
Scott never really said anything. I mean, he just knew I was going. And there were a few times he went with me, but it wasn't weekly.
Right.
You know.
What about Joe?
Joe, he didn't say much. He just let me do what I wanted to do. He just wasn't interested in going, and those were his days off. He worked every day. Sundays were his day off, and he was going to rest.
Right.
That's pretty much how
The way
Scott was.
Okay.
Mhm.
At what point did you start pressing Joe to go to church?
I let it go for a while and just went by myself. And then when we started coming here to Woodland, I started asking him every day to come to church with me because people didn't even know I was married. I would come by myself, and they didn't even know I had a husband. So I kept asking him to come, and he would either say the night before, yeah, I'll go with you, and then not go the next day, or just flat say, no, I don't feel like it, I'm not going.
Probably pretty much just telling you that so you would leave him alone.
Yes.
Did you probably more or less quit begging him
Yes.
to come? What about you, Tara?
I can't remember what specifically got him to go in. I don't know if some of it was me hounding him per se, really pushing him as far as our children, and here I go, me and the kids, and Daddy's not with us. I do believe some of it was prayers from other people. My dad, praying for him. I hounded him some, but then there again, I just really began to pray for him.
Yeah.
All right, so let's say this too, and let me just throw this out there for anybody who might be listening. We're talking about husbands here, but this isn't always the case where it's just the husband that won't come to church. There are the cases where the wife won't come or the children won't come. So I know we're talking about husbands, but this could be any family member. But statistically is what we're really going off right here, because I'm telling you, these are some unbelievable numbers right here. And I can honestly say I was very blessed. My mom and dad, both, my dad made it a point to make sure we were in church our entire life. But it was a mutual agreement by my mother and father. And I'm going to tell you, it made a huge difference in my life growing up. So I can see where this statistic, I can see where these numbers are very accurate and very real. But so let's go back to Joe for a minute. All right, so you're asking him, but no, or I'm tired, or just more or less leave me alone, or yes at that night, then wake up the next morning, no, I'm too tired, just leave me alone. So this rocked on for how long?
Oh, gosh, for years. It was a few years. And I was praying to God that I wanted to be equally yoked with my husband. I wanted to be involved in the church, but I wanted my husband to be involved also. And I kept praying and praying for him to want the same thing.
Right.
And so I continued to ask him over and over, and I would get the same answer. And there's times when I would come to church mad. Just, I didn't even hear a word of the sermon because I was so mad because he had told me he was coming and then didn't. And all I could think of was he didn't do what he told me he would do. And I just wanted him here so bad. And it came to a point at one time when I told a friend of mine, I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm tired of begging. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being upset and mad. I'm just not asking anymore.
Now, hold on. This we're talking, you said a few years. This is probably 20 years, maybe? Tell me.
Well, it's been a while, yes, probably so.
Give me a time limit here. Roughly. It ain't got to be exact.
Well, I guess you're right. It's probably around 20 years because we've been coming here, I think 7 or 8. So it's really started about 8 years ago when he started coming to church here. So, yeah.
So you pressed him, give or take 15 to 20 years.
Yes.
Hard, begged, prayed,
Yes.
pleaded.
Yes.
What about you, Tara?
So I was just sitting here thinking back. When Gracie was first born, he would, when Scott would go to church with me, we would go to, my parents divorced when I was younger, so my dad was a part of one church, and then my mom was part of another. So if we went to church, we went to one of the two churches. But for whatever reason, Scott just didn't really feel comfortable in those churches. They were bigger churches. And, he says, I want to be involved somewhere in our community. And, looking back, I had been praying that Scott would be the spiritual leader of our household. So I'll never forget. We had the conversation this one day. We had actually been to church, and he said, I just want to get involved somewhere in our community. I don't want to have to drive 25, 30 minutes from my home to a church when I pass 10 churches, and there's somewhere in our community. And so we are going down Woodland Drive, and he said, you know, we could try Woodland Baptist. And I said, no. And I gave him a reason.
You know, it's ironic. All these years you pray for your spouse to get in church, and then they finally pick a church, and you're like, nah, I'm good.
So he said, and I gave him the reason.
Right.
And he said, okay. He didn't hound me, but he never went back to church with me. And that went for about 2 years.
Okay, so, and at this time, Gracie's how old?
5, 4, 5.
All right, so we got at least 5 years, but he's off and on. And Joe, 15 to possibly 20 years, would not go into church for nothing. At this point, you both kind of got to be at a breaking point. You kind of got to be at a, Lord, are they ever going to go to church? And are they ever going to go consistently if they ever do? If I ever get them in there, Lord, that'll be a miracle. But much less, at this point, Lord, I don't know that they'll ever stay in church.
Yes.
And it's at this point where you're probably, like we've titled this, growing a little weary. You're growing a little tired. It's like, in your case, Tara, you can't find a mutual ground on a church. In your case, you just can't get them in the church, Tracey. Tracy, what happened to you? Because this is pretty neat story right here. What happens that gets Joe finally into church?
Well, I got mad and told a friend at work. I went to work and I said, look, that's it. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being mad at him. I'm just tired of dealing with this. If he wants to go, fine. If he don't, fine. I'm not worried about it anymore.
Right.
And she looked at me and said, don't you ever give up on your husband. She said, you keep praying and you keep asking. And I thought, okay, yeah, you're right. So I did. I just kept asking him, and then one morning I got up and didn't even believe he would do it. Just asked him out of habit and said, I'm going to church. You going with me? He said, yeah, I think I'll go. And he's came ever since.
So it had to be shell-shocked that morning.
Absolutely.
And so when you're getting ready, you're probably thinking, all right, at any second he's not going to go.
Absolutely.
Any second he's going to change his mind. Any excuse whatsoever.
Yes.
And then he comes to church.
Yes.
And what happens?
He came to church. He listened. It was Junior was preaching then, and he decided that, you know, this place is pretty good. I enjoyed it. I liked it. Everybody was welcoming. Nobody judged him, and it wasn't what he had pictured in his head. He fit in, and he enjoyed it.
Right. What about Scott there?
Well, so like I said, I told him no that day, and, you know, he didn't say anything. Well, a couple of years rocked on, and I was really growing in Christ at that point and in my relationship. And I'll never forget, we were actually at the beach. We were on Shell Island, and we had a bunch of friends with us, and I was just kind of out floating by myself, and I was praying, and I was like, God, you know, something is just not where I'm supposed to be.
Right.
And I said, I'm around all these people, but something's just not right. And he spoke to me that day, and he says, you know, you prayed a while back and asked me to make your husband the spiritual leader. But when he tried, you told him no.
Oh, boy.
And I knew right then exactly what that meant.
God didn't hit you in the heart.
And so I was like, okay, God. I was like, I hear you loud and clear. That was on a Saturday.
Right.
That Wednesday night, I took a leap of faith, and I walked in the back doors here with me and the kids. I knew several people, but he did not go with me.
Right.
But I went home, and I told him, I said, I think you'll really like it. And he came with me on Sunday morning.
Right. All right. So, and let me say this. We're not just trying to pump up Woodland Baptist Church right here by any stretch of the means. That's not the point and purpose of this. But it just so happened that this is the church y'all finally get your husbands into. And it's amazing at how the transformation in these two men, because I know both of these men very, very personally, and I've been here 3 years now, and I have seen growth in both of these men just since I've been here, and but something has happened that has totally made this story that much sweeter, because Joe comes to church And not only
Yes.
did he come to church, like you said, he fell in love with church.
Yes, he was all in.
He went hook, line, and sinker. He fell in love with church. And matter of fact, when I came, we had already set him up with talking to him about, well, let me go back a little further. When I first came, and we still laugh about this all the time, I knew nobody but you and Joe and just a handful of y'all, you know. And Wednesday night service, Joe's very outgoing and all. And I say, Joe, how about you pray for us? Because I didn't know nobody. And he froze up. It was hilarious. I'll never forget that. But he had told me, he says, we had asked him to do Sunday school superintendent and other things. And he told me, he says, I really feel like the Lord's working on me. I really feel like God is calling me to do this. And while we were here, then all of a sudden we found out he had something wasn't right. And we knew
Right.
this. And come to find out, it ended up being a cancer diagnosis.
Yes.
And he goes through the treatments. And, you know, a brand new Christian like this, sometimes it discourages.
Yeah.
But it did just the opposite to Joe.
Absolutely. He told everybody he ran into about Jesus. He never let up. Any chance he got.
And this is what, about a 3 or 4 year old Christian at this time.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's a young Christian, even though he's in his 50, right at 50, maybe at this time. All right. And then Scott is like I say, I see a lot of growth in Scott too, and the maturity level as a Christian and how God had really worked on his life. And I'm seeing these two men really, really grow, and their families growing in church. On top of this, your son gets saved. That's statistic.
Yes.
Your son, after seeing what happened with his dad,
Yes.
gets saved.
Absolutely.
Your 2 children get saved during this time, right?
Scott and the children were all baptized together here.
Together. So, you know, whether we want to believe the statistic or not, y'all 2 are proof, you know, that there is a lot of truth to this statistic. So here we go. But something else happens. Time rocks on. Joe's on fire for God. He gets through the chemo. And a couple of personal things happen between me and Joe. One of them happened in March of this year. He told me, he says, Jonathan, he said, I've looked at my entire life. And he says, I just examine everything about my life. And he said, I thought I was lucky
Yeah.
for years and years and years. He says, but I realize now God has been moving in my life this whole time. He said, I'm like the most blessed human being I've ever. He said, it's unbelievable. I mean, he's just getting so excited and giddy when he's telling me all this. He starts telling me stories where he should have been dead or in jail or all these things. And he starts telling me how over and over and over, I thought I was just lucky. I thought I was just the luckiest man alive. I got the most beautiful wife. I got all this. He said, I'm just the luckiest man alive. And he says, but now I know God's blessing me. God's touched my life, Jonathan. And he said, it's one of the most unbelievable things that ever has happened to me. And it's all because you didn't quit praying for your husband. Both of you.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all got a verse that it's ironic, but it's not, that y'all both found at the same time together. When we mentioned this, y'all didn't know this,
No.
but it's amazing how God spoke to y'all. What's that verse?
Galatians 6:9, and let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart.
We're fixing to end this podcast right here because we're going to go into part 2 right here. Now, the title is going to change drastically, unfortunately, but we would not have part 2 and the hope
Yes.
in part 2 without part 1.
Amen.
We could not be, not saying we're not broken, but could not be at peace without this story right
Absolutely.
here about that day that Jackie Craig come to you and said, don't give up on your husband. And Terry, you praying, don't give up on your husbands. And now it ain't just affect you and your husband, but your kids.
Yes.
And the story's continuing on. So we're going to shut it off right here. And I'm going to ask everybody to be sure to tune in next week. You will not want to miss part 2. And I'm going to go ahead and give you the title, Life After Loss. But also, if you enjoyed this podcast today, please be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you get notifications every time we send out one of these podcasts. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you have never received Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, and you would like to know how, if you want to know what it takes to become a born-again child of God, please reach out to us. Also, maybe you just have a prayer request. Maybe you just need to speak to someone about a situation in your life, and you just need prayer. If that's you today, please reach out to us on our Woodland Baptist Facebook page. Thank you again for listening.
Well, everyone, that is the end of our podcast for today. If you'd like to give to our ministry, please go to worship@woodland.com/give, and in the comments, put podcast. If you'd like to mail us a check, you can mail it to 114 Bayview Drive, Phoenix City, Alabama, 36869.